In case you missed it earlier, I am Katie DeVette. I am this year's chair of the planning committee. We have a whole lot of people here who have done a whole lot of things to make all of this happen. If you could please, if you are a member of the planning committee and in person, can you stand up, please? Fantastic. We have about 20 more people who are virtual who are joining us and helping out that way too. Now, we have a lot of people coming from a long, long way. If you came from less than 10 miles away, stand up. Brilliant. If you were within 100 miles, join them.
How many miles are we?
If you were within 200 miles, 500 miles, 1,000 miles, far enough away that you don't know. So in name, we are the Northwest Interlibrary Loan and Resource Sharing Conference, but in practice, we encompass most states, and last I checked, at least 7 countries. We have people from all over the place coming together to do a lot of cool things. And today, for our keynote, to get us all kicked off, we've got Kurt Munson, who's going to talk to us about user stories and t-shirt sizes, perpetual adaptation after the COVID reset. So let's welcome Kurt.
Let's make sure this microphone is on. Can you all hear me?
No.
Okay, well, that's.
Yes, I answered your question, but I can't hear you.
I guess you better leave that mic here.
All right. Can you hear me now? Okay. Apologies. I tend to talk with my hand, so if I throw the microphone and I brain somebody, this is entirely unintentional. So thank you, everyone, for having me here. This is based upon feedback from last year's survey. This is based upon things that people were talking about, concerned about, wondering about, things that we're probably all thinking about. But when I started working on this, what was I going to say? I wanted to scope this with some things, and that's where the user stories and the t-shirt sizes notions come into this, because these are tools that we can use that I think help us think through and work through and communicate to others various aspects of this. And I'm also looking at this 5 years of coming out of being in a COVID stay-at-home order. We had a stay-at-home order in the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago that started on March 21st, 2020. And let me assure you that Lori Lightfoot, our governor at that point, was not fooling around. You were to stay home, and there were all these wonderful memes of her. That's her holding the official proclamation that you have to stay at home. And she's with the Old Navy preacher, who is this guy that stands out in front of the Old Navy in downtown Chicago and broadcasts that you're all going to hell. And so the meme is, even you stay home, sort of thing. So we went through that, all of our normal business practices gone. Italians sang opera from their balconies to keep their spirits going during their COVID lockdown. We're from Chicago. We're not that classy. No. We all opened our windows. We all stood on our balconies at 7 o'clock on that March day and sang Living on a Prayer, and John Bon Jovi actually joined us. It was pretty hilarious. And then eventually, we go through the stay-at-home period. We're going back to work in some weird, different way. Maybe that's a physical campus. Maybe that's a physical library. We might actually interact with people in person instead of, using that, radical new technology of Zoom that some of you may have heard of, and access to our physical spaces. But our situation was very different than it was before. I think our old traditional questions remained. But I think we also found ourselves in a changed environment that I think we're still collectively learning how to figure out and how to work through. And I want to make it very clear that I think it's okay that we're still collectively working through and trying to figure out what that is and how it's changed and what's different. So what do we do with this new situation that we're in? What tools do we have? That leads me to the two things that I was talking about in the introduction. First one is a user story. A user story is very simply a way of succinctly communicating a need of a desirable and an output so that we can judge what success is. We tend in libraries and certainly in higher education to be sort of like, okay, go off and do stuff with things. But we're not really good at defining what the success is going to be and whether that actually did what it was supposed to. Probably did a really good job of spending the money, but did we get what we wanted out of it? We use this a lot in the IT world so that we can communicate the end user, the person that's using that software or whatever needs to be able to do this. So when you write the code, if the code does this, yay, good to go. If not, yeah. So the example of this, super straightforward, simple one. Staff need the call number printed on the pull slip so they can locate that item on the shelves so that they can then fill the request. How many people think this is not a super basic thing for those of us that work in interlibrary loan? And if anybody raises their hand, this is not necessarily something that an IT person is going to know because they're not doing the work. So that notion of that user story of what is the outcome and who's it affecting and so on and so forth runs us through that. T-shirt sizes is basically just a metric of how much work is it going to take to be able to do this. And that can go from anything from like, extra small to, Christo wraps the rice stock sort of, enormousness sort of situation. Okay. Now I know that we're all just after lunch and we've already done our stand up and sit down, how far did you travel sort of thing. Here's our next exercise that we're going to do. I promise you there are no group activities in this presentation. So we're going to go through some user stories. For my dissertation on this jazz artist, I need to get the original lead plates that were placed at the Library of Congress from the printing of this, and they were placed there for copyright purposes. User story number 2, I need to read Steinbeck's East of Eden. All of our local copies are checked out. I need to get one. Who at 8:30 on a Monday morning wants to do user story number 1? Okay, you all.
It doesn't take long to write an email that says no. I had that on the way in, so I'm good.
I will do number 1. I've had my cup of coffee. I need the caffeine first. On that one now.
Okay, you people. To actually get the original lead, I mean, there's a massive quantity of work there. So, your t-shirt size on that, unless you're going to be, negative Logan over here that, doesn't support his patrons.
I'll support him by saying you don't need those for dissertation. I wrote one, you don't need it. Have confidence, Kurt.
We told them to go to the Library of Congress. So, I mean, but again, it's this notion of, we're putting this together to say what the outcome is and what the need is, and then how much effort it's going to take us to be able to do that. So having done that definition of terms and a little bit of introduction, we're going to move into sort of the 4 areas that I grouped thematically from feedback from last year's conference. And my notion is we're going to do this from the standpoint of going from the things that nobody wants to talk about to the things that are more fun to talk about. So we're going to start with budgets. You will note statistics and reporting. So budgets are, do you want me to go back so you can? Because the slides are in the app. So anyway, I mean, budgets are a necessary evil. Everybody hates them, but the problem is they're so incredibly locally specific. And, if somebody says, well, the University of Michigan has a budget of, X for monographs, and other institution has Y is their budget, is that really comparable sort of thing? So, although I do think that user stories and t-shirt sizes can be very helpful for us when we're making arguments to basically go, give us money, please give us more money than you gave us last year, or at least don't give us less money than you gave us last year. So enough about budgets, and then these are not the drones that you're looking for. Statistics. Once we came back to our libraries and we had access to our physical collections and our students were back on campus, or our populations were able to get into our physical spaces, the metrics are very different than they were before then. We'd kind of been coasting along, and for any of you that are at ARL libraries, number one, my sympathies, because if you have to fill out the ARL stats, we've been counting those same numbers for years. I don't know that they're actionable in any way, shape, or form. I don't know that they tell us anything. I know that it tells me nothing when I report stuff to the state of Illinois, except that somebody at one of the public libraries in Illinois is really interested in watching every single DVD of Dukes of Hazzard that Northwestern owns for no apparent or good reason. So, what is this telling me? What is the path forward? What is actionable with these statistics? And so I don't really think that the old way that we did those necessarily worked ever. And I certainly don't think that it works now in this newer environment. And numbers cannot explain complexity. I give you lead plates from the Library of Congress for a dissertation versus something else. So here's a case study of this. When we came back to campus and it was reopened and the administration was like, we are an in-person campus, everyone will be here, minus all the distance education programs, but never mind. We saw a huge drop in our interlibrary loan volume. Like, we were looking at 56% borrowing from what we had seen the last year, where we were 100% on campus and prior to the pandemic. And given that ILL success has traditionally been defined by the total volume of things that you're doing, in the past, I was like, when my AUL sees this, or my dean sees this, or whatever else, we're going to have a really potentially big question that we've got to answer, because it's going to turn into, why are these numbers down so much and why aren't you all doing your job? Because of course the assumption is that, we're sitting in our offices, twiddling our thumbs or doing whatever else. So the user story that grows out of this is, I've got to find an explanation for why this traditional metric is no longer usable and why I've seen this change, so that I can present statistics that have a background story to them, that will be able to demonstrate how we're actually serving the populations that we're there for. Now, the t-shirt size on this is, I don't know. It could be really straightforward and simple. It could take me weeks to figure this out. But I'm going to have to go through and do it because I've got a radically different situation than I had before. So what I found out when I went through all my ILEA data is faculty and grad students were just doing the same thing that they'd been doing before. Requesting stuff, asking for the weird, the strange, the different, the unusual, the things that you need for a dissertation sort of thing. It was the undergraduate textbook requests and standard scholarly monograph requests that had plummeted. Now, I think this is because when the profs got sent home and had to redo their entire syllabus for spring quarter of 2020, they just kept sticking with the same stuff that they'd been using before, because trust me, redoing a syllabus is a royal pain in the so that's where the drop was. So the outcome from this, that's the actionable item, is this, i.e., what I can go tell the dean, which is basically, dude, don't cut my budget. Okay, you can cut money from shipping because we're not sending all of these textbooks back and forth anymore that we had been. But I've got populations that are still asking complicated questions, who need materials that are unique, unusual, and more difficult to identify and source than just something where it's like, oh, there's an ISBN number. I'm going to run this variety as logic, and it's going to show up in a box from the University of Iowa sometime next week, sort of thing. Okay. Second least evil thing. Copyright Contour alternatives, ebook interlibrary loan. Again, if you want to grab a picture of this, because it says UGG again.
I totally am. Thank you.
The 70s brought us a number of very unfortunate things. My grandmother worked for Sears. You do not want to know what my wardrobe was as a small child. I stuck Steely Dan in here mostly because I can't stand them, and my brother-in-law thinks they're wonderful. Okay, now I've made an enemy. But relevant to this is so very, 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 very much drama surrounding photocopiers and copyright law. And then 1981 comes along and we get Arial. So we're sending stuff electronically, Soviet Union falls, but 34 years later, we're still running on a digital copy of a PDF model sort of thing. And much of what we're doing is still also predicated upon that change in the copyright law in the mid-70s. It's amazing what you can find in file cabinets at your office. So pop quiz, what does CONTU stand for?
Something terms.
Following it.
It's either committee or commission or some sort of,
See,
you
don't even know, Kurt.
I know the rest of it, so thank you very much. There's a wonderful picture on Wikipedia about Cantu, and it's a whole bunch of white men in bad suits. So if you were looking for, a way of not making appropriate decisions, anyway, so it's whatever on new technology use. And that new technology is a photocopier. How many of us even have photocopiers in our libraries anymore? Anyway, so Cantu and copyright law are massively out of date. They're not terribly relevant to what we're doing today in this environment, but there is still this notion, I think, for other people that work in the library that are not in interlibrary loan or document delivery or in our, scholarly publishing areas that still think, that these things matter. And I mean, to a certain degree, maybe they kind of do, but really at this point, we're dealing with license agreements, open access. We get a subscription for something. Whereas, in 1975, you bought it, you got it in paper, you sent it to the bindery, you put it on the shelf, you had it for forever. That's not the way that the world works at this point anymore. It's a much, much, much more nuanced situation than it had been in the past. So moving on out of, that sort of thing, which I think is much more a situation of communicating to administrators and others in the library that was a really nice thing when Reagan was president. That's not something that we're necessarily dealing with at this point. Ebooks, I'm going to take ebooks and put that together with a whole bunch of other stuff and say it's not just ebooks. Repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, so on and so forth. To staff, administrators, patrons, so on and so forth. It's that notion of license as opposed to own that is the norm now. And that could be a journal article. That could be an ebook. That could be streamed media, whether that's something that you get through, where you're dealing with video, or if you get a big music school and there's a whole bunch of audio that you're working with, there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there right now that we're working with. So I'm calling it e-stuff, my new technical term. Watch this space. I think we're seeing rapid development in this area. The Boston Library Consortia, I don't know if Mark's here. Hey, Mark, is doing a lot of work in this area with Project Reshare. We're seeing a lot of other activity with other places and groups working on this. The most recent version of ISO 18626 was recently released, or is in process of being released, which includes a lot of work to build that into the international standard for interlibrary loan stuff. So it's a very quickly evolving area, but libraries and consortia and others are going to have to drive this because the publishers, the content providers are not going to do this for us. They did not do this for us when Arial was introduced. We're going to have to push it. And we're also going to have to keep explaining to them that we're not giving everybody keys to the kingdom. We're not giving them the ability to download everything that you have. It's a request for one thing, and there's part of me that would dearly love to have them come in and actually process an interlibrary loan request and see how much effort can go into that. And then maybe they'd understand that it's not, this terrible thing where we're taking their market away. The problem is somebody's going to have to go first. And everybody's afraid of getting sued. And it doesn't help that when we were in COVID, the National Emergency Library was a thing. And then all of the drama that we went through with Hati, if you had Hati, then you had to like have your entire stacks closed so that somebody could get into, you know, the E version of that. So there's going to have to be a lot of work done in this area, but we'll get it figured out. And we've got people that are actively working on it. Okay, so here's our user story on this. I want to borrow and lend licensed e-content as well as locally digitized materials legally to serve patron needs. That's really straightforward and simple. It's really straightforward and simple to say as a sentence. It's the sort of thing where if you were on the elevator with the dean, or worse yet, a dean of a school, they would be like, well, you know, isn't everything on the internet and can't you just do this? Well, the answer is no, but you're on an elevator and you're going up one floor, so you can't really explain the complexity of the stuff. The reality is the t-shirt size is enormous on this, I think. And that's because we have two different areas that we're dealing with. First one, we're moving away from this very, very, very straightforward and simple rule of 5, Cantu, easy to figure out, just count it, check them off, that's it. Pay the Copyright Clearance Center and be done with it sort of thing. And we don't have a standard model for what the next thing is going to be. We don't necessarily have a software platform that will do this for us yet. We do not have a basically guinea pig or somebody that's willing to be the canary in the coal mine to go first to try this once we have the software to actually be able to do it. We've got legal things that we're going to need to work through. And when I say legal things, again, this is what does your license agreement say and what does it tell you you can do? Because 117 in the US code isn't doing you any good with any of this stuff because you don't actually own it. You get to be able to, you know, view it. And then there's probably a whole bunch of other things we haven't thought about. But I don't see this as a Chicken Little situation where the sky is falling. I think this is a really big opportunity for us to move forward. But there are definitely going to be costs that are involved with this. And I love the notion of, oh, well, you know, just scan it and send it off to the other place. I'm like, if you're going to give me an army of 10,000 student workers, and I get to rent out the Pentagon so they have enough physical space to be working in as they're scanning everything, sure, we can do that. And then, of course, you know, the budget implications are going to be like, no. So, okay. Moving on to more positive things, patron outreach and education, serving underserved populations. I think the first thing that we need to start with is know your customer base. Know what your audience is. Know who the people are that you're going to serve, that you can serve, that you should be serving, as opposed to that liaison that comes along and says, my undergraduates in chemistry, and I'm totally making this up, are not using interlibrary loan. No, that's because they're in a lab. And they're moving things from one test tube into another test tube, And, they're learning this sort of basic stuff. It's like first year med students are not big interlibrary loan users because they're getting all of this information about the systems in the body dumped into their head. As far as I can tell, there's not been a massive change in the renal system in the last 15 weeks. So, looking up articles, no, they're not going to be doing that. Reach out and concentrate on the people who can and will benefit from the service. Don't try to blanket the entire world, because what you're going to do is just create noise for them, which will equal noise for the library, and they're going to, not be thinking about that. It's the same thing as I keep getting these stupid ads, and I got one last week again for gutters.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Do you live on the second floor of a 5-story condo building where you have no roof like I do?
Oh.
If I wanted to install gutters, which I don't, I would be completely unable to do that. Just lack of roof. It's the same thing as I'm also getting these ads for used dentist chairs. Now, mind you, they will throw in reupholstering them. But I still also have absolutely no use for this sort of thing. So it's, keep that sort of notion in mind of, let's be talking to the people that we need to for helping the people that we're actually able to help. So partner with others in your library, partner with others in your school, institution, county health department. I mean, it doesn't matter. Just, get to the people that are in contact with those populations that you can help and you'll be able to work with. So, yes, that's me. It's 30 some odd years ago. That is a crossbow at the National Library or National Museum of Denmark.
And you won't write an email that says no?
No, I'm going to point.
He did.
Just send that picture.
Don't ask me.
Can we get security for the heckler over? Logan and I have worked together for years, so he's allowed to.
Missed me, Kurt. Like the plan.
I don't know how much I'm going to miss you once I get done. Anyway, so again, we're going to go back to that whole notion of user stories and t-shirt sizes. Here's Kurt. I write a 10-page paper for my, 100 level class. We've all been there. We probably didn't have a terribly good idea of how to do any of this as freshmen. I certainly didn't, because we never did anything like this in the rural high school that I went to. So t-shirt size on this, probably medium, but again, we're going to have to do a lot of library explaining here. And I think this is another thing that we need to continue to explain to our administrators, other people in the library. Interlibrary loan and document delivery is only part of that entire information gathering and synthesizing process for the individual. Whether that's writing a college paper and how to do that and how to gather those materials and analyze them, or it's somebody that's doing genealogical work where they get the microfilm of the census and then you have to teach them how to use the microfilm machine, sort of thing. Funny side story. We once on interlibrary loan got some sort of kit from the 70s, which was a 45 record and a film strip. And this student's like, basically, what the hell is this? And our assessment librarian was standing behind the circ desk when I was handing this over, and we took the film strip out and we showed it to the student, and they're like, what is this? We're like, oh, and my assessment librarian says, oh, that's how PowerPoint was done in the 70s and 80s. So, second user story here, and I admit that I totally stole this notion from a New York Times article on how funding is being cut to community colleges. So you're taking a community college class of troubleshooting and repairing hydraulic lines as part of your job at Caterpillar, the big company in Illinois that, you know, makes like road repair equipment and so on and so forth. You're not going to be needing interlibrary loan for this. So this is not a population that, you know, we necessarily need to be talking to. Okay. Moving on from that, mentoring and succession planning. I've been having a lot of conversations around this recently. I think mentoring is incredibly important. I think that information and our knowledge that we have needs to be shared with other people. You know, there are no nuclear codes in document delivery. So, you know, let's make sure that this information gets out there. But I think we also need to keep it clear that mentoring is not training. It's one thing to teach somebody how to use the UPS machine to get that box of stuff off to another member of the Big Ten. That's not the same thing as, is this really too much of this book to scan for this person, versus something else where it's making a judgment call. That's a lot of, I think, what mentoring is, and also making people feel empowered to make a decision, so that when they make that decision and you go back and go, you scanned 50% of this, why do you think that that was okay to do? They can go, well, because it's pre-23 and it's not in copyright anymore, and it's not in Hati, and we can't get it any other way, and we're like one of 4 places on the planet that owns it. Okay, you've got an argument there. So what we're looking for, I think, with mentoring is getting that at that point of giving people the skills to be able to say, I made this judgment call, and here's why I did that. Now, this is going to come in a whole bunch of different shapes and sizes. It can be very formal. Remember, let's say 15 years ago, when all of the directors of the medical library, of the Association of Medical Libraries, decided that they were going to be retiring at some point, and they needed to mentor people so that there would be new directors that would come in. So they had this terribly formal thing where it was all set up, and they did X, Y, and Z, and then, you know, people would come in and so on and so forth. And I mean, it didn't matter whether you were a good director or not. You just sort of like got assigned somebody. Not that I had opinions about it in any way, shape, or form. So it can be very formal. It can also be super, 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 super informal. But I think the most important thing is don't force it. You can't make somebody learn something unless they want to or they're interested in it. Like I said, it's a really bunch of soft skills. It's not, you know, hitting F1 to, you know, do X, Y, and Z in the old version of OCLC, sort of thing. So my real life user story with this is somebody that I work with wanted to get a temporary summer employee turned into a permanent employee. And staff member writes this big long memo to the person that he reported to and I reported to. And I happened to be meeting with my boss, and he and I had a really good working relationship. And he's like, "Oh my God, this memo was terrible. You would never write something like this." I'm like, "Okay, that's kind of mean to the person that wrote this, number one, but I do understand where you're coming from with this. And yeah, this is not the way to go about this," sort of thing. So eventually the person that wrote that memo ended up reporting to me. We had a position that we wanted to upgrade that frankly desperately needed to be upgraded within the library. But, and this will shock any of you that have ever been even exposed to higher education, there are forms and there's bureaucracy. And probably, did somebody say no? No, please tell me, where is this magical world you live in? I had an employee accuse me of being sarcastic once.
No. You? Sarcastic?
As I keep trying to explain to my partner and my family, I'm the very epitome of happiness and joy. Anyway, getting back to the point now that I've been derailed by certain people. So we're in the process of doing this upgrade. And I was like 100% behind this. We need to do this. This is ridiculous. This doesn't fit with anything within the rest of the university. This doesn't fit with any of our peers. Because you haven't said anything snarky yet, Meg, I'm going to pick on you. I had to end up getting the job description for somebody that reports to Meg at Penn to try to convince the university of where this needed to go. But the main thing was working with this staff member so that they knew how to navigate the bureaucracy of the university and the process and what needed to happen. And, just like a sponge, he soaked all of this up. He did the form, and we ended up with success. Was I intending to do this? Was I thinking, I'm going to go mentor now? No, but that's what I ended up doing. Okay. Succession planning, other part of this. There's this notion and concept of future self. Now, this is normally used to think about an individual and where do you see yourself as the use of the word future would indicate in the future. And I think this is a very helpful notion when we start thinking about succession planning and how we move forward with this, because it's what's the future environment going to be? How do we move forward? That could be, we've got somebody that's retiring. We tend to focus this on the people rather than a variety of other things that could be coming together with this. So it's where do we see ourselves next week? Where do we see ourselves in a year? Where do we see ourselves in 5 years? So this sounds like all those terrible questions that they ask at job interviews. Where do you see yourself in? Sort of thing. So we work through that, but I also think that succession planning can't be just people, even though that's typically what it has been scoped as in the past. I think it needs to be much more holistic. We also have to think about what are our platforms that we're using. I've probably been through at least 6, if not 10 major system upgrades in my career. ILSs and whatever else. I'm not counting little point releases for Iliad or whatever else. When you make a switch from running something on a Voyager system to using Alma, Ex Libris wanted us to have our transition day going from Voyager to Alma on Sunday. I said I was not having the entire staff of the library that would be involved in this coming in on a day that they would normally be off, and Ex Libris could bloody well wait until Monday for us to do this. Actually won that battle. So, but I mean, it's these sorts of things. That's succession planning. That's moving from one way of handling things and the inherent workflows that go with that. Or as we look at, moving away from the way that we've been doing sending of digital information, that's a very PDF sending copy, i.e. PDF is new version of photocopier use sort of thing, into doing something that's digital lending, that's succession planning for how we're going to handle all of our workflows and so on and so forth. So I think all of these things need to come together. But again, more than anything else, it's just, talk to people. They've got questions. Make sure that they've got a space to bring those questions to people to be able to answer them. And frankly, if the answer to the question is no, then that's where we are. So, okay. A couple of final thoughts on where we are. First off, we're all in this together. That's a great thing about interlibrary loan and document delivery. That's the thing that I've always loved about working in this area of libraries is we all cooperate, because you can't do what we do if we don't cooperate. Except for the people that are non-cooperative. National Library of France, I'm talking to you. But we need to keep telling our stories, and we need to keep advocating for ourselves, because if we go back to that notion of those old number statistics we did 20,000 interlibrary loan lending requests. Oh, well, we did 25,000. I mean, if you've ever gotten a bunch of ARL deans in a room and they start playing one-upsmanship against each other, it's kind of simultaneously fascinating to watch and scary. So we're not like that. We work together, we do X, Y, and Z, because we're all working to that point of getting that thing for the patron. User stories, the why behind stuff. I think that notion of the why behind it and what we're trying to accomplish and for whom we're trying to accomplish it is becoming more important. And then also there's a certain point where we just need to say, we can do this, other stuff we can't do. That's where our t-shirt sizes come into this. But in the end, and as I put as the first line of my introduction in the program for this, no interlibrary loan or document delivery or resource sharing can ever happen without a person placing that request. And I think we all need to keep that in the back of our mind even when we get the really, really, really irritating request for the 7th time for somebody, there's always somebody behind this. We can't say the same thing about a subscription to a journal. We can't say the same thing about an approval plan. We're always helping people. And I think in the end, that's a really cool situation to be in. So, thank you. I'm going to open it up for questions.
Oh,
So while people are thinking about it here, one of the questions we have from online, how did t-shirt sizes come to be an analogy of difficulty for you?
When I was working on Project Reshare and we were getting returnables developed, it's a metric that they use in the IT world for a different way. I mean, it's like, well, how hard is this going to be? Oh, that's a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. T-shirt sizes makes it more abstract, shall we say. And I mean, everybody can relate to what a t-shirt size is versus, some random number.
Anything else in the room? I will bring the mic to you. Yes.
I have a question. Hi, this is Jean from University of Hawaii at Manoa. I have a question about the canary in the mine. How do you think the consortia like Big Ten and others in the across the U.S. or even international can work towards more fair ILL for e-resources? Do you have any thoughts on that? That's a tough question, I know. But.
I think, I mean, it's a tough question because we haven't yet to develop an answer to it. I think when consortia negotiate their deals with providers or publishers, if we add in the ability to do lending of e-resources, if we do that, we're working at scale. Because if we take the Big Ten, and for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Big Ten, we can't count. We're actually, I think at this point, 17. But there were a number of contracts that were negotiated for the entire Big Ten, all of the schools in the Big Ten. You're dealing with a substantial number of institutions at that point, large quantities of revenue for these publishers, and doing it at one place versus 17 different places doing it individually, there's more power in those numbers, I think. I don't know to what degree we can do this on an international level, mostly because of the complexities of working across national boundaries and other things of that nature. So that's probably a quarter of what an answer could be, but it's probably about as close as we are at this point. But I think more than anything else, it's just continuing to advocate and continuing to educate. Because it's not like we're necessarily asking to do something radical from what we were doing before. We've been sending journal articles around that we have in electronic content, for decades. Elsevier apparently continues to be a successful company. So interlibrary loan has not destroyed them, though they thought it was going to happen, because remember that originally you had to print the thing out, scan it back in, and then you could send it electronically.
Okay, I'll go to the other online one here, and it's how do we get past the numbers when our mayor states, so it's a small public library, that they want data, it's actual numbers.
I mean, we can provide the numbers. And I'm not saying that the numbers don't have value. But I think we also need to be having a conversation. Well, we have to figure out where the mayor's coming from with this, and why do they want to know what the numbers are? And is this because the state of Illinois requires all the libraries to report their numbers, and then they look at what the other equivalent places did, and so on and so forth? So they can be valuable, but if you've got somebody, and I'm going to pretend that we've got a patron in the small public library that's doing genealogical research. That person can write a letter to the mayor and go, hey, the library was able to get this stuff for me so that we can give a fuller version and picture of what's going on.
Move, not just have the quantitative, do qualitative and quantitative information. Yeah.
We need to have both of those. As one of my best friends from college put it, she was a sociology major. Quantitative without qualitative is statistics. Qualitative, I always screw these two up. Correct me, Logan. Okay. Well, hey, a broken clock's right twice a day. What?
Nice to yourself.
The qualitative without the quantitative is Trivial Pursuit.
Any additional in the room? I think we have 2 minutes left on the clock.
I'll ask one, Miriam. You're not getting off that easy, Kurt. I think that the data that show the service utilization is important for us as supervisors and managers and administrators. And you're talking about gathering data that tells stories outside of impact as increasing in importance since COVID. Can you talk, Kurt, a little bit about strategies that you've used to gather these impact stories? What would you recommend to us, who are used to just gathering the operational service use data? What about the impact data? How do you recommend going about getting that?
I think that's a very good question to be asking as to, how do we put the two of these together? But I also think that the impact data and how you gather that is very, very, very institutional specific. It's very easy to take numbers and compare them across different institutions because it's a number. But if I'm at a R1 institution where half of the student population are graduate students and they tend to be in the humanities, my stories and my gathering of that data is going to be very different than if I was at an institution that had a massive undergraduate population, a very small doctoral program, And so it really depends. And it also, I think a lot of it is kind of some pump priming for getting administrators or others in the library to be willing to hear those sorts of stories. But yeah, I mean, it's I think part of the reason we haven't done this in the past is because it's more difficult to do and it's not easy to compare. But I think we're in a different environment than we necessarily were before COVID. So it doesn't hurt to be able to have those stories to pull out of your back pocket. My favorite one is grad student. We had to figure out whether a particular Black newspaper was published during the Second World War in LA when riots were going on. Because if it wasn't published, then she was having to redo chapter 2 of her entire dissertation, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Excellent, everyone. Thank Kurt yet again. And just a reminder for everyone, this and all of our sessions here at the 2025 NWILL are going to be recorded and will be eventually up on Whova and later on YouTube. So if you missed something or if there was something you weren't quite sure about, you can catch it there. You can also continue the conversation in the chat in Whova as well as in the community boards. And if you're here in person, you can ask Kurt more questions a little bit later. Right now we have a little bit of a break. There is coffee and water and cookies in the back. And then we split for our first concurrent sessions. We'll have one in here and the other one will be in the space where we had the workshop this morning. Thank you so much.